Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I will show you how to get started using React Query with Typescript. React Query is a library that is built on top of React to handle server state. It simplifies the complex task of fetching, caching, synchronizing, and updating asynchronous data from APIs. In today's video, we will go from a normal React project which uses React State Management for handling server state to implementing a React Query server state management solution for fetching data, making updates, and deleting data. If you think that makes sense, then absolutely smash the like button. Ensure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification so you can get access to all of our videos as they drop. The first thing I'm going to do is just walk you through this React project I've already set up using Vite. So let's get straight into it. Let me quickly walk you through this project structure. This is a React project that I have generated with Vite. I'm going to assume that you already have some experience generating React project with Vite. So I'm not going to waste my time in explaining all of the files and folder inside of this project. The only folder I am going to be explaining to you is this src folder, okay? So let's jump straight into it. Inside of this src folder, you can see that we have two folders and a bunch of files. We have the assets folder, and this asset folder comes with all React project generated with Vite. And inside of this src folder, you can see the React SVG that comes with all React Vite projects. We have a components folder that holds all of the components for this project. We are going to look at this folder and the components inside of it shortly. But before we do that, let's take a look at this app.tsx file. Inside the app.tsx file, you can see that I import use states from React. I import the filter button components from the components folder. I also import the header components from the components folder. I am also importing the input components from the components folder. And I am also importing the to-do list components from the components folder. Inside of the app component, we create a stateful variable filter, and we also have a function for updating that stateful variable. You can see that I am strongly typing this stateful variable to be a narrow string where it can contain the string or active or completed, and this is going to allow us to filter our to-dos later. You can see that we have two div elements with one being nested inside the other, and inside of the inner div element we are nesting the head component, we are nesting the input component, we are nesting the filter button component, and we pass that filter stateful variable and function for updating the stateful variable to this filter buttons component. There we have a to-do list component where we pass the filter stateful variable as props to it, okay? So let's look at this header component. This is the structure of the header component, and it contains a simple header file. Inside of this header file, we nest a h1 element that has a text that reads my to-do list, and we nest a paragraph element that has a text that reads stay organized and get things done. Let's look at the input component. This is the component that allows us to add a to-do item, and this is a form. This form has an input field and a button for submitting the form. Let's take a look at the filter buttons component. This filter button component assets two props, the filter prop and a function for updating the filter, right? Inside of this component, we extract the filter and the function for updating the filter. Then we have a function button class that checks which of the filter buttons is currently active and applies an active class onto it. Now, this component has a div element that nests three buttons inside it. One that allows us to show all the to-do items, one that allows us to show only the active to-do items, and another one that allows us to show only the completed to-do items. Finally, we have a to-do list component, and this is a list item that nests a to-do item component. This to-do item component is a simple list item that displays a to-do item. It has a checkbox that allows us to update the state of a to-do. It has a span element that shows us the title of the to-do, and a button that allows us to delete the to-do item. Now let's look at this helper file. This helper file contains helper methods that allow us to interact with the API where our to-do items will be fetched from. Okay, we have a get to dos function that allows us to fetch all to dos. We have a create to do function that allows us to create the to do. We have a delete to do function that allows us to delete the to do, and we have an update status function that allows us to update the status of a to do item. Next, you can see that we have this main.css file, and this is standard with all React projects, so I'm not going to waste my time on it. And finally, we have this type.cs file that exports a single type to do. This is the type for all our to do items. So let's jump straight into the coding. The next thing I'm going to do is to install React query by running npm i@stack/react-query. This installs the React query library. Let's head back to the to-do list component. I will first show you how we normally fetch data inside of a React component. To do this, I will create a stateful variable to do's, which I will strongly type to be an array of do's. Then I will add a use effect hook. Inside of that hook, I will add a function run setup, which is an async function, and inside this function I will fetch the to do's by calling the get to do's function, which can be imported from the helper file. Then I will use the data returned from this function to update the to do's stateful variables. I will loop over the to do's and render a to do item for each to do in the list. Previewing this in our browser shows us that everything is alright, so I will head back to the to do list component to log out the to do's variable so you can be sure that it is actually empty. If I head back to the browser, you can see in the console tab that the to do array is an empty array and it contains no value. Hence, that is why our UI is empty. I will head back to VS Code and open the app.txs file. Then I will import query clients and query clients provider from our stack query. Inside of the app component, I will create a variable query clients and I will set it equal to a new query client. The primary function of the query clients object is to manage the cache for all queries by storing the results of successful queries indexed by their unique query keys. It tracks the staleness of cache data, marking it as stale when required. This triggers a background refresh by any active components listening to that data. The query client also provides APIs for interacting with and manipulating the cache from anywhere in your component tree. We'll also have to pass this object to the query client provider. We need to wrap our entire application with the query client provider. The query client provider provides a query client to the rest of our application component tree via React context. I will set the client props to be equal to the query client object, and I will head back to the to-do list component where I will import use query from our stack/react query. Then I will erase the stateful variable and the use effects hook which I've already added in this component. I will create a variable query which is equal to the result of calling the use query hook. This hook accepts a config object as its argument, and on that object we need to define a query key which stack query we associate with the fetch function to the query function. The query function is the function for fetching data, and for that I will set it to be equal to the get to do's function. I will destructure out the data property and rename it to do's. Previewing this in our browser, we can see that nothing changes. Hence, I will head back to the to-do list component where I will also destructure out and its loading property from the return value for the use query hook. This is a stateful variable that tells us whether or not stack query is currently fetching the data. We can use this to display a loading state in the application while the data is being loaded. Previewing this from our browser, you can see that we get the text loading and then it disappears when data is finished loading. But I don't need that, so I'm going to get rid of it. Now, let's see how we can add a to-do with React query. I will head to the input component where I will create a form ref using the use ref hook. Then I will assign it to the form. I will import use mutation from stack query and I will call the use mutation hook. This hook also accepts a config object, and on the config object can define a mutation function which will be the create to do's function. Then I will add an onSuccess property which will be a function that accepts a to do object. Inside the function, I will fire an alert to do created successfully. Then I will console log the to do. I will set the value of the input field where we enter the title of the to do to be an empty string. Then I will import use query clients from stack and create a query object. I will use that query object to invalidate the cache and refetch all to-dos by calling the invalidate queries method on the query client. This assets an object, and on the object we set the query key to be the same one we set when fetching the to-dos for the first time. I will destructure add a mutate property from the return value. This is a function. Then I will also destructure add an isPause property, which is a boolean. This is not what I intended to destructure, but will be fixed that later. So let's continue. I will create a handle submit function, which is an async function that accepts an argument e, which is of type form event. Then I'm going to call e.prevent default inside of this function. I will extract add text entered in the input feed, and then I will call the mutate function. This function accepts a couple of arguments. The first one being the argument we should pass to the create to do. This function accepts an object with a title property and an ID property, and as such we pass an object with a title property and an ID property to it. Then I will pass an optional config object, and on this object I will define an onError property. This will be a function that will be called if there's an error while running your mutation function. Inside this function I will fire an alert error creating to do. Then I will console log the error. Next I will set the onSubmit property of the form to be equal to the handle submit function. Then I will rename the isPause variable to isPending, which is the correct property I wanted to extract from the mutation object. I will use this isPending property to show a loading state when the mutation function is running. If I head to the browser to test this out by adding a to-do with title of new to-do, you can see that we get a new to-do. If I add another one, you will see that we get another to-do with title of debug backend. Adding a third to-do with a title of play football also adds that to-do. Let's work on completing to-dos and delete them. For that, I will head back to VS Code, where I will navigate to the to-do item component. I will import use query client to create a query client. Then I will also import the use mutation hook. The mutation function for this instance will be the update status function, which can be imported from the helper file. I will also add an onSuccess function, and inside it I will alert the user that the to-do has been updated successfully. Then I will use the query client to refresh the to-do list by calling the invalidate queries method on the query client. I will extract the mutation function and name it update to do. I will listen for the unchanged event on the checkbox, and if it is not checked, then I will call the update to do mutation function with the ID of the to do. If the to do is already checked, that is if it's already completed, then I will call the prevent default method on the event object to stop on checking the checkbox. If I head over to the browser to test this out by checking the first to do, you will see that it is completed and it gets checked out. Let's see how we can delete a to do, and for that we will head back to the to do component and we will use the use mutation hook again to create another mutation. The mutation function will be the delete to do's function, which can be imported from the helper file. Then I will add an onSuccess function, and inside it I will fire an alert to do deleted. Then I will refresh the to do's. I will extract the mutate property from the return value and rename it to remove to do. Then I will set the complete property on the delete button to be a function, and inside it I will call the remove to do function with the ID of the to do. Then I will head back to the browser to test this out by deleting the first to do, which works. I will delete the second to do, which also works. Then I will add a new to do, debug backend. We need to work on filtering to dos by their status. This ensures that the all tags button works, the active button works, the completed button works. First, I will add a to do cook meal. I will also add another to do play music. I will complete the cook meal to do and the debug backend to do. Let's head back to VS Code, specifically the to do list component, where I will update the use query hook. I will add a select property function. This function accepts the returned array of to-dos, and inside of this function I will call the filter method on the to-dos array, and for each to-do I will check if the filter is all and return true, that is return the to-do. I will also check if the filter is active and only return to-dos whose is active property is true. Finally, I will return a predicate which checks whether the to-do dot is active is equal false. I will head back to the browser and you see that by pressing the active button, this only shows us active to-dos, while pressing the completed button shows us to-dos that have been completed. Meanwhile, pressing the all button shows us all to-dos. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you found it useful and interesting. As always, smash the like button. Ensure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss any of our videos as they drop, and I will see you in the next one.